Hey, welcome to the Tom Sumner Program for the Internet. I'm Tom Sumner here with Flint's premier political pundit, Paul Rosicki.
Always good to be here.
We got some great stuff coming up. In fact, we have two authors that we're going to be talking to during the next couple hours. Some very interesting conversations. Big authors, in fact, well, authors of big books.
Big book. That's a
Yeah,
serious book. That's a
this
that's
is
as big as
this
a
takes
coffee table.
this takes both hands to hold this book up. No, we're going to be talking with Tom Ang, the author of Photography: The Definitive Visual History, internationally acclaimed photographer and teacher, lecturer, author. That's
And
over
I'm
30
looking forward
books.
to that one especially because that's been an interest of mine for
And
many,
then
many
this
years.
one's kind of fun too. I'm not sure which one we're going to do first. Probably this one, the Lego architecture, the creator of that, and it's actually morphed into having kits where you can buy Legos to
Yeah.
build
In
the
fact,
Eiffel Tower
we
or
bought several
whatever.
for gifts for friends over the years. Of I think it was the Eiffel Tower and the White House and maybe the what's some building in Chicago, the Sears Tower I think in Chicago. But yeah, we've bought more than a few of those in recent years.
Anyway, I think I'm doing this out of order a little bit because that's new business. No, that's right. We do new business first, and a little old business. Last week we talked about the election in Scotland, the
That's right.
yes or no
They
campaign.
decided to go no. They're staying with Great Britain.
They are in
Yeah.
fact, and
The
to the
United Kingdom
tune
remains united for the moment, at least.
and to the tune of what, nearly 82, 83% voter
An
turnout.
incredible turnout. I mean, I wonder. I was talking to somebody about that this past week, and I actually I heard it. I heard ninety
Now
percent some
you
level.
see what I did there, because today is National Voter
That's
Registration
right.
Day,
That's right.
and,
Good,
and so
good
we're
point. Good
spinning
time.
last week
Yeah.
into 82, 83% there. Why not here?
Yeah, I was wondering. I was talking to a friend. I wonder if we have ever had an 82% turnout for any election in this country. Um, I think I've read that depending on how you count the numbers, back in the 1860s or 1870s, we had a very high turnout just before and during the Civil War. So maybe we came close, but to be perfectly honest, I'm tempted to say I doubt that as a nation we have ever had an 80+% turnout for any election in this country. I mean, we may have come close once or twice back in 1860 or 1870, maybe, but I suspect we have not even done that. And again, on our average election these days, and by that I mean the last couple of decades, for the presidential election, we'll get 55, 60% turnout. For this year, for the governor's elections, the midterm elections, we'll be lucky to hit, on average, nationwide around 40%, and that's typical.
And
And
that's even with a lot of states, Michigan in particular. The statewide party organizations are putting out massive
oh, they are.
efforts to get out the vote. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit because, as I mentioned, today, September 23rd, 2014, volunteers, celebrities, and organizations from all over the country will hit the streets for National Voter Registration Day. It is set aside as a single day of coordinated field, technology, and media efforts, which organizers hope will create pervasive awareness of voter registration opportunities, allowing us to reach tens of thousands of voters who we could not reach otherwise. Um, Michigan doesn't really need this kind of a push. We have one of the better
We are
systems for
We do.
registering voters.
And our turnout is a little better than the average compared to so many other states. Thing is, when you go out west, especially California, Hawaii, some of those, and in the old South, some of those states have got horrible turnout rates. But yeah, we're a little better than average, but still, compared to Scotland, we're not even in the same ballpark at all. Not even close.
And I heard our Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson, on the radio this morning, and she's plugging the National Voter Registration Day, as Secretary of States all over
Right? To
the
be
country, I'm
appropriate
sure,
call
are.
for.
But she went a little step further. They went back in the warehouse and dug out the old Secretary of State mobile office and
Oh,
put it
that's
on the road. It's they've got a 2,000-mile trip altogether, and what they've done is, for the purposes of targeting college age voters.
Yeah.
They're hitting all of the colleges in the state of Michigan.
That's a step in the right direction because the thing is, once you get started voting, you tend to keep doing it. But very often, especially for college kids and other young voters, they can go, turn 30 and never voted once, and once you get to that point, you tend not to do it much after that.
But I also wonder with this trailer showing up all over the state, emblazoned with Secretary of State
Yes.
Ruth Johnson, if it doesn't become a whatever the Secretary of State version of an October surprise is.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a tremendous bump for her campaign.
It's a great campaign, and again, that's true for anybody who has been Secretary of State because you get your name on all kind of buildings all over the state. As I say, these mobile vehicles that got your name on it and so forth. So, yeah, being Secretary of State is one way to get your name out.
Kind of reminds me of the old days when the local sheriff would always have his name on all the police or all the cruisers.
Every cruiser had his name on it. Yeah, they stopped that because there was a complaint because it was costing so much every time you got a new sheriff.
Now I wonder is the Supreme Court ruling Citizens United and some of the other cases around campaign financing, if it pulls the rug out of people saying that's unfair campaign contribution?
I would suspect so. With all the other stuff going.
I mean, I wonder if the defense could be made that there's no limit, why not do it?
Oh yeah, no. I recall a time. This is in Illinois. When the Secretary of State had his name on the back of every state employee. So every guy working on the highways was wearing a shirt or a jacket with the Secretary.
Oh, they had some kind of a tunic that had a logo with the guy's name.
Had his name on the back. So
that's
every
funny.
state worker had his name on the back.
And that was, do you remember what state?
It's Illinois.
Illinois?
Yeah.
It sounds like Louisiana, but
well, there's a lot of similarities between Illinois and Louisiana. I think both those states have sent their governors to prison in great numbers.
They're having a contest of some sort.
I think so.
Do you know offhand? I mean, this is parenthetical. This wasn't planned or anything. But do you know offhand which state has the most governors that have gone
to jail? I think it is either Illinois or Louisiana. In fact, I used to joke.
How does New York rate in there?
I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of a recent New York governor who's gone to prison. At least right now, nobody comes to mind. But no, Illinois has sent half the governors since about 1960 have served time in prison. And I used to joke that they were going to have to open a gubernatorial wing of the state penitentiary for all the ex-governors who were hanging out there.
Turn it into a think tank of some sort. Yeah, that's funny right there. But getting back to this thing about voter turnout, because, and you and I talk about this every campaign
every
season, every election, special or otherwise, especially in the school board and special elections.
8-10% turnout.
Single-digit percentage turnout. Well, I posted something about the Scottish election turnout on Facebook. Now, I can't remember if it was on my post or someone else's post of the same article that was talking about these numbers, that somebody commented on the post that if Texas decided to vote to secede from the Union, that they would get that kind of turnout.
Oh yeah, they might.
Is that what drives it? Do you think if there's an issue that's hot enough, it will turn people out? Those big, those big corner turning decisions like seceding from.
As a matter of fact, that's exactly right. That's exactly why we had those high turnout rates right before the Civil War, because we were in a sense of crisis, and it was. We were talking about
legislatures were voting on whether to stay or go.
There was that sense of crisis, and ironically, some people even argue that a low turnout rate means everybody's kind of happy. Everybody, whoever wins doesn't matter to me. They're all okay. I'm not sure that's quite true, but I
was gonna say I get the sense from social media, but just from talking to Joe Average in a bar.
Oh yeah.
That they're just completely disengaged.
I think so.
They don't.
And I
They
think
don't
that's-
think that
it makes
what
a
they
difference.
do matters or counts, and if it does, they don't think there's much difference between the two parties.
That's what I hear
Whoever
a
gets
lot.
elected is going to be incompetent or corrupt, and they're just completely disinterested unless an issue comes up like secession.
Yeah,
I have had people tell me recently that they said they have the expression going around now is if it really mattered, they won't let you do it, vote. And I have to say, from what I've seen the past 20 years, I'd say there's probably a lot of truth to that. I don't see a lot of difference between the two parties. I really don't. I really don't see too much difference.
John Wilson and Master Control weighing in there.
Yeah.
I think John, that you're right in that regard. It hasn't gotten to the point where people are being prevented from voting, but there are calculations made to avoid the impact
yeah.
of voting, and in some cases scheduling voting for low turnout.
Sure. And again, I think you're right in the sense that both parties have got a vested interest in the way things are right now. If you were to double the turnout, I mean, and you could do that with certain techniques. I mean, the bottom line is there'd be kind of a risk for both the Republicans and the Democrats. So yeah, there is a certain vested interest in both parties. Now, this year you're hearing the Democrats talk, "Oh, we got to increase the turnout because they don't do very well in midterm elections," and that's true. And they'll push to get their people out. But if all of a sudden you could wave a magic wand, and you could double our voting turnout, from 40% to 80%, I'm not sure that either of the two major parties would buy into that, because they'd be afraid, well, who are these extra 40% of the people? Are they Democrats? Are they Republicans? Are they something else? It would really kind of derail the existing.
Well, and it would open up the opportunity for a third party.
Oh,
If voting jumped by 40%, it would be because of a third party.
As a matter of fact,
I
I'm
would
going
think.
to pick up on your third party idea. One, you said both American parties are about the same, and there's some truth in that. I mean, Republicans kind of conservative, Democrats a little more liberal. But you compare that to a lot of other countries where you've got a half a dozen different parties, from the royalists on one hand to the communists on the other, and a bunch of folks in the middle in various ways. I mean, there you've got some choice. I mean, and again, some choices that are kind of fearsome on occasion. Those will increase turnouts to some degree. But yeah, in reality, yeah, both American parties are pretty much relatively middle of the road. They differ in a lot of ways and some details. But again, compared to other countries where literally you do have some parties who are, right-wing Nazi or want to bring the king back or something like that, to the left-wing communists, hardline socialists and all that, plus some of the Christian Democrats and folks who are somewhat in the middle in Europe as well. There you get some real competition. And again, those to some degree do drive some turnout.
And what's interesting about that, and my friends in Canada and also in Great Britain talk about having multiple parties represented, in the legislature, it really changes the way people legislate, because it's about building coalitions.
Yeah.
You cannot get a majority with any one single party, so you have to do a certain amount of deal making, and it actually, some would argue, and it's a convincing argument, that having more than two parties creates better problem solving because of that.
At least there's other options.
At least because of that bridge building and
Yeah,
that.
I think there's some truth in that. Now, the downside of that, on occasion, is the fact that when you build these coalitions, they're very unstable. The Italian government in the years after World War II was famous for never lasting more than 6 months. I mean, they'd put together a bunch of parties and they'd form a government, and then somebody would get angry and stomp out, and they have to form a new government. So it can lead to some instability, but it's got some real advantages. And again, it does at least have some other options.
But to the average guy, to the average guy ordering a big stein of beer on tap, sitting in a bar somewhere or a pub somewhere, what's the difference between that kind of collapse and gridlock?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right.
We have a two-party system and they're just at a log jam.
In fact, the argument you often hear in favor of our two-party system is that it avoids that kind of gridlock. But in reality, in recent years, recent decade or so, we've seen nothing but this hardline gridlock between the two parties because everybody is so locked into their position.
I have a friend that suggests that maybe instead of having the set amount of representatives like we do now, and we lose or gain according to population size in the states, that we actually increase the number of representatives. That way we'd get something truly reflective of the voting population, rather than trying to, on one or two issues, they might back a Democrat, or then they, on this other one, they might back the Republicans. If they had candidates who actually simply just voted along with the lines, more along the lines of the population, when they cast their vote, that might be more reflective and more responsive to the broader spectrum of the voting, the plural system we have, the society we have now. So, I mean, I was like weighing that over, and of course it'd be cost as much as they cost us now to run. That would be something kind of maybe to ponder.
You mean to simply increase the size of the Congress?
Congress.
Yeah. Well, actually, there was the theory there that if you were to use the numbers you had when the country was first formed, I think there were about 30,000 people per member of the U.S. House in 1790 or thereabouts. Now it's about 710, 20,000 per member of the House these days. But if you stuck with those early numbers, you would have a House, I think, somewhere around 5,000 people. Now, how you would govern with 5,000 people need to meet in the
But how did
stadium.
it? But when you think about it,
Yeah.
How did it not go up from, from the because it was based on geography rather than population, even though it was always assumed that the House of Representatives was representative of the population and senators were doing the geography, or at least to balance this sense of big state, small state.
Yeah.
But the House of Representatives was always supposed to represent the people, but it did it by geography within those states.
That's right, by drawing districts. And by the way, states don't have to do that. Theoretically, and so a few states have done this occasionally, theoretically we could elect all of our 14 members of the House at large and not even have districts. There have been a couple times when states have failed to redistrict when they did have at-large elections for the U.S. Congress. And earlier, this is before 1850, there were some states that just didn't bother messing around with districts, and they would just elect everybody.
That would be really tough for a state like Michigan.
Yeah, in other words, you'd go into the voting booth, you'd have to vote for 14 people out of a list of at least 20.
And in Michigan, all 14 would be from Detroit or Grand Rapids.
Potentially, yeah. Now, I would imagine what would happen is the various parties would have a slate of candidates. Here's our Democratic slate, here's a Republican slate. And
of course.
The hope is your people would go in there and they'd pick their people. But theoretically, as a matter of fact, we saw, remember last week, the individual running against Dan Kildee, I guess technically does not or did not live in the district. You don't have to live in your district to run for the U.S. House. You got to live in the state, but not in the district. But he got a lot of flack because I think he lives in Ypsilanti. And so, technically, to run for Congress, you don't have to live in that district. They almost always do, because you rarely get elected without doing that.
Right.
But the law doesn't require that. So.
Well, unless we have the kind of turnout, voter-wise, that they had in Scotland last
I'm not going to hold my breath
Wednesday
on that
or
one. As a matter of fact,
Tuesday.
I just did a little piece for the East Village magazine this morning, and I guess the theme of what I was saying, what I wrote there, was that this is kind of a quiet election. I mean, we got a lot of stuff on the ballot, big governor's race, Senate race, and all that, but the energy and electricity that you often see for these things really isn't quite there. And I think it's partially the candidates, but I suspect we're going to see 40% or so, maybe 45 if we get real lucky, but I think we'll be in that ballpark this time around, is my guess right now at least.
It's going to be interesting, and with the polling numbers are showing really all of the top tier candidates just neck and neck.
They really are.
The Senate race, the governor's race. There hasn't been a lot of talk about the Secretary of State's race,
Not much, but I've
or even the AG's race as much.
There's a little article in the Journal on the Attorney General showing that to be fairly close when, again, a significant amount of the Michigan population didn't even know who the Democratic candidate Mark Toten was. But at least one poll, this is only one poll, showed that to be a very competitive race for the Attorney General, which surprised me. Now, with these elections, these polls can change overnight. I mean, somebody pointed out that in 2006, Dick DeVos was ahead of Jennifer Granholm by 20 points a month ahead of the election. And she killed him. I mean, she won and had a 10, 15 point spread by the time she won that election. So these early polls may not mean very much, but yeah, there's some surprises.
Well, I always wonder about the polls when you have, because so much of it is people sending the incumbents a message that we're unhappy with your performance, and so the polls show anybody but Snyder, anybody but Terry Lynn Land, anybody but Bill Schuette, anybody but Ruth Johnson. You're gonna see that reflected in polling, but when it comes right down to voting, I don't know who these people are.
Who's this other guy? I don't know. I've heard the Snyder name, or I've heard.
Even when they decide, it's the devil,
That's exactly, could be it. Yeah, I think there's some truth in that.
And that's pretty much what happened with Jennifer Granholm, because Dick DeVos was well known downstate, but people wouldn't have known who he was in the UP necessarily.
That's true. And he had the money to put on a good campaign for a while, but as I say, what also happens is there's a lot of folks who just aren't tuned in. So you call somebody up today or the middle of September, how are you going to vote? And if they answer at all, they'll say, oh yeah, I guess I'll go, I'll do this or I'll do that. But the honest answer is they don't have the slightest idea how they're going to vote, because they don't even know who's running. They've seen the ads, they kind of zoned out when those ads come on television, but they're not paying attention yet, and they're not going to pay attention until the last 2 weeks, maybe, before the election.
Right.
So you're hitting a lot of that stuff too, and that's very, very unpredictable kind of stuff. So I don't know. I said those polls now. The surprising one we talked about last week was that one showing Schauer running even or slightly ahead of Snyder, in contrast to what we saw earlier in the year. I mean, even almost all the folks who were watching that race saying, gee, that's surprising as anything, because most of them figured Snyder had this thing sort of in the bag. If that poll is accurate, it may be much more competitive than we think. But it could also change by 20 points by election day as well. That's still 6 weeks away.
Do you think the Snyder Schauer is over campaign early on that ad? Do you think that helped Schauer more than it hurt him by boosting his name recognition?
Yeah, that's exactly.
The whole theme of the ad was around Schauer's name. Now people know there's a guy named Schauer. It was a clever ad.
It was a very clever ad, but you're right. In fact, the problem...
But I think it backfired.
I think so. The problem that Schauer's had, I mean, and it's probably still true somewhat, is that 40%, 35% of the people still say they don't even know who the guy is. So if you're going to run ads of, attacking your opponent using his name, in a sense, that does help.
That's why I think the new tact that the governor's taken with the softer bean counter, I'm the accountant. I mean, that's classic Snyder, to come up with a persona and sell that persona.
Not quite the nerd.
4 years ago, he was the tough nerd, Superman coming out of the telephone booth. Now he realizes that, he's got to be a pretty tough nerd to defend some of the things that aren't popular he's done. So now he's sort of this underdog guy.
Just a guy who just shuffles the papers and
I'm just a bean counter, and nobody, bean counters never get credit. And,
you know what's interesting about that ad?
And the real message of that ad is that we're on the right road. You may not feel it yet, but you will. Don't stop now, or it'll never get to you.
That's right.
That's the message in that ad, and it's very effectively done.
Is. And what's very interesting about that is that in terms of the Snyder personality, one big issue that's been kicked around in the media here and there is whether or not they modulated his voice. Because Snyder does not have a great radio voice or speaking voice. It's kind of, when he gets especially excited, it's kind of high and squeaky. But on that ad, it's very slow. It's far lower tones than he normally speaks in. And again, some of the pundits were talking about whether or not, did they do something electronically?
No, I think it's the mood of the ad. Yeah. What they've done is they've lowered his personality to fit the voice.
I think so.
So now the voice seems bigger than it did before, because before he was the governor and a big tough nerd, and then he comes out with his little squeaky
That's
voice.
right,
When
that's
he's a
right.
little squeaky accountant, his voice is perfect for it.
It's Mr. Relaxing.
I don't think they've had to enhance it at all. I think it's that I'm just a bean counter,
Yeah,
you know,
just-
and it's the attitude and the personality that's making that work.
Yeah, and I think to be honest, I think that kind of personality he's depicting there is a good counterpoint to what Shower's been showing. Shower's a little more wired, a little more high pitched than some of his, and I'm not quite sure that fits Shower's personality very well, and I'm not sure it comes across.
No, because this is actually kind of funny because personality-wise, in terms of voice and commanding authority, they're both not.
That's true. Yeah,
Big.
neither one is Mr. Excitement in terms of campaigning.
They're not great speakers.
They aren't.
They're not.
Yeah, they're not Jennifer Granholm.
No.
Who's a very good speaker by every definition.
No, and
Yeah.
for all the fun that Jon Stewart made of her, you know,
Yes.
being a cheerleader and all that.
Well, well, I mean, she was. I mean, it showed.
But she
in her
pulled
State of
that
the
off.
State
She was a
addresses,
good speaker.
Some of those lines were cheerleading lines. She regretted it more than a few of those, but they were clear that the cheerleading skills showed when she gave those State of the State addresses and said, "You'll be blown away." What was there? Oh, there's another one I can't think of right now, but another one of those catchphrases that she later regretted when things didn't turn out quite so well.
Oh, the first time I interviewed her, she came up with she had a Granholm soundbite because I remember asking her about a national survey had come out about some of the other states that were starting to feel financial pinches, and it was pushing Michigan down the list a little bit. And I asked her if she was getting some relief from that, you know, some sense of.
Thank God for
Oh,
Mississippi.
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
something.
I think it was California
Well, yeah,
actually
that's
that
true,
knocked
that's
us off
true,
the
well,
top. But I asked her about that, and she says, "Well, it's like I've been saying, first in, first out." Well,
That's a
you know, it
good
was a
phrase.
great line.
Yeah.
It didn't turn out that way
Not
because
quite, but
we're
yeah.
still struggling. But it, you know, but that was a classic.
But she had the ability to give a good speech and make a good phrase and deliver it so well. I recall several times when we were covering her State of the State address, we'd have the text, and you read through it, and she would just deliver that so perfectly. Snyder never worked from a text; he always worked from an outline.
Oh, I know.
So you know- yeah.
I've sat and gone through the speeches. President Obama, of course, is
Yeah,
you know literally verbatim from the advance copies. And Jennifer Granholm was that way. The advance copy
yeah. If
was.
there was a single phrase she changed, you'd notice right away because it almost never happened. She stuck with that text, but the delivery was perfect. I mean, you watching delivery without the text in front of you, you assume she was just pulling the stuff right off the top of her head.
And I have to say I've tried to do it both ways, and for me personally, I prefer the Snyder way. So I always give him, you know, when he doesn't give you much more than an outline up front.
Yeah.
That's always a little frustrating as somebody who wants to plan around, you know,
the kind of questions you wanna
quotes
ask
and
and
things
everything.
that
Sure,
you're going to pull
sure.
out, you know, whether you're writing a piece or broadcasting a piece, you know, what sound bites do you want to use and all that. You can plan some of that ahead when you've got prepared text. On an outline, not so much,
That's true.
because you got to catch it on the fly, and that can be a little frustrating. But as a person giving a speech, I would much rather have a note card with about 5 bullet points on it and
so
go
would
from
I.
that.
As a matter of fact, one time I learned to have a great respect for people who can read teleprompters. Well, one time we were doing a telecourse at Mott College, and we had written the script for this thing, and we were working in the studio at the college reading this thing. And I always say, I gave lectures day in and day out for years at the college, and I don't think we ever got a single take right in the first take. We were always flubbing these lines because we were trying to look natural while reading this teleprompter, and it never came off naturally. So yeah, I say I've developed some respect for those who can do it. It looks simple, but it's not. It's a lot. I feel much more comfortable, as you say, reading from a list of bullet points than trying to
Right.
read things from a text card. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I think probably would be a good time to get into our guests. Paul and I will be back after we hear these conversations. Both of them very interesting. We're going to start with a photography one instead. I know I said earlier that we'd go with Lego first, but let's do the photography one. which will take us up to the end of the hour. I'll be back to switch us out into the second interview. Paul and I will be back at the end. We have a few local things that we're going to get into. Last week it was, I mentioned it was Eric Mays' birthday,
and
last Tuesday. Well, he's back in the news
he's made the news again. I saw the story today.
There are a couple of other things that are kind of interesting too. Drug
Eric
testing.
is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, he really is. He really is. Anyway, the interview coming up is with Tom Ang, started medical school in Singapore, and
I'm really enthused about this interview. I want to hear it because I've not heard it yet.
While he was in medical school, he just got the bug, the shutter bug, apparently.
Well, that was my first career plan was to be a photographer. I worked for a newspaper for about 5 years, and photography's been a hobby of mine forever. So I am really enthused.
I think this happened sort of by accident, but he's become internationally renowned. He's got a couple of there's a big intro coming up here in a minute, and we'll learn all about Thomas Ang. The book is Photography: The Definitive Visual History, and we'll go to that now. Hey, welcome back. My guest coming up, joining me by phone, is the author of more than 30 books, both in print and digital media. He served as a juror on international competitions and was senior lecturer in photographic practices at the University of Westminster to London for over 12 years. He has worked as a technical editor for specialty photography magazines, won the Thomas Cook Travel Book Award for his photographic coverage of the Marco Polo expedition. He has presented 2 TV series on photography for the BBC and an award-winning series for Channel News Asia. That is just a few of his accomplishments, but we'll be talking about his latest accomplishment, which is a book on the with the award-winning publisher DK called Photography: The Definitive Visual History. My guest is Tom Ang. Tom, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Pleased to meet with you.
God, that was such a long intro, and I just scratched the surface. Even on your website, you say.
I saw your eyes glaze. I could hear your eyes glazing over.
On your website, you talk about being a photographer, a presenter, a teacher. The list goes on, and it's quite an impressive list of all the things that you do. But what I want to ask you, and this is a little offbeat, Tom, but is photography in the eye of the beholder?
No, it's in their soul. That's what it is. That's the right answer. Because for it to work, as some great photographers have said, the only pictures I take are those that hit me in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just in the eye. If you look at the pictures which are in the book, the ones that have stood the test of time, I think you'll find that all of them hit you in the gut or somewhere deep inside. It's not just in the eye. It's that's the mark. It's one of the marks of photographs that last and that change the world.
Yeah, there have been some key moments in history where technology has had an impact on visual arts. There was a time when many artists, the so-called starving artists, would make their living by painting the portraits of wealthy benefactors and patrons, and then photography came along and replaced all that, put a lot of those people out of work. Has this idea that everybody's running around with a camera in their phone, how does that change the way we look at history and events?
Well, I think in the first instance, it's completely through the profession and the practice of photography upside down. Digital photography did, and I think now as a kind of secondary revolution, the camera in the smartphone is turning the profession and the practice of photography and film actually upside down as well. But in terms of how we see the past, I think it reminds us that actually technological innovation was fundamental to the invention and then the progress of photography. And that's in fact something I really wanted to reflect in the book, which is why we have these cornerstones of what other people would regard as really quite insignificant things, like the invention of the CalArt flash synchronizer. You have to search through the page to actually find this little thing. But this little thing completely revolutionized news photography and wedding and portrait photography when it was invented, because it suddenly opened up a new way of illuminating the world, which photographers didn't have up to that point. So, and that's one of the things that we wanted to get across in the book, that photography and technology develop pretty much hand in hand.
Photography has been really kind of the way that we have, at least for the 20th century, and to some degree the 19th century, recorded history, through iconic photographs. We think of, the Civil War battlefields of the 1860s, and then, the Hindenburg and the Marines at Iwo Jima. There are these iconic images, that we look at history through. Are we going to be, I don't know, suffering from quality because there are so many amateur photographers capturing these moments? Do you know what I mean by that?
I understand that, but I think we need to think about a historical process, because during the Second World War, the U.S. Military had scores of photographers photographing at the front.
Right.
My point is that out of the thousands of pictures which are lying around somewhere in some vault in the Pentagon or wherever, none of them have been seen. And the reason why they haven't been seen is because they fulfilled their functions. They were records for the battalion and regiments or whatever, but they haven't gone any further than that. The images that we remember, like Joe Rosenthal's flag raising in Iwo Jima, that instantly hit everybody in the gut at the time, and that's why it was like an overnight sensation, and that's why we remember it, and that's why it's iconic. So I think if you look now, it may be harder to find a single iconic image of any major event, because there are so many events. But still, I think in time, the great images will survive. They'll be reproduced again and again, and they will be regarded in time as the great iconic images.
With some of these great photographs, and I saw some references to this on your website, and I've talked to other photographers, National Geographic photographers and so on, who talk about, is what makes a good photographer the ability to anticipate a get you in the gut moment and capture it?
I think one of the skills of a photographer, when I'm on workshops, I tell the guys, well, you need to be able to read the future. So you need to anticipate, but that may be no more than honing ordinary skills of seeing how a situation is going to develop, and getting yourself in the right position in the right time. But I think there's also a lot of luck in it, and there's also a lot of
right
of what it's and it's what's in your genes as well. I remember a press photographer saying, I'm giving up. And when I asked him why, he said, well, I seem to have a knack of being one block away from the action. It means that I get home safe and sound, but I miss the action.
Right, right. Does the I can't remember the phrase, and I think I picked it up from your website, Tom. That does the photographer get the shot, or does the shot get the photographer?
Yes.
I know that's kind of a chicken and the egg question, but
well, I think and it has the same kind of trap as the chicken and egg, in the sense that you think that as a photographer you're going out to take the picture, and yet it is up to the world and the universe to allow you to do so, and it's because I've been in so many situations where I think, oh, there's going to be a great picture here. So I wait, and then I wait, and I wait, and an hour later I think, actually, maybe I wasn't right about that. And I turn the corner, and there is the bugger waiting for me. And if I'm not ready, I've lost it. And it's because I was waiting in the wrong place, or I had misread some signs or indications.
now I was
So,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
No. You, look, so I think what photographers do, especially those working in travel and documentary, is that you, as I think we were talking about earlier, about having this instinct and this openness, and having this awareness, but that also means an acceptance of what is available. I get many young photographers saying, the light's terrible, I can't do anything, I'm going to put my camera away. So I say, well, it's this is what you've got. If you put your camera away, then the only thing I guarantee is that you won't get any pictures at all.
Right.
But if you learn how to work with what is given, then maybe you get it, maybe you don't, but at least you have a chance.
Has the new technology made lighting less a concern or more?
Well, the new technology has made lighting less of a concern in the sense that you think you can, or young photographers think that they can change the lighting and they can get away with lighting that is less than best. What I'm going to say in opposition to that, it in some ways actually produces more problems because it makes them think that they can change the contrast or lightness or brightness and make a picture better when, in fact, all you're doing is just fiddling around with an inadequate picture. They can fool themselves.
You work a lot with young writers, or young photographers, rather. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But how did you get started? How did your interest evolve in photography?
Well, it was.
I read somewhere you were in medical
It started
school.
when I was at medical school, I started photographing when I should have been learning my anatomy and where the subclavian artery went. And after a bit, once I actually proved that I was useless at medicine, what I learned was that what photography offered was essentially a left brain, right brain synthesis.
Uh-huh.
It enabled the creative side of me, but it also appeals to the rigorous evidence-based methods, which I also understand and like to work with.
Uh-huh.
So when you put those two together, you actually have the beginnings of somebody who can write about photography, and that's what I did. I started, and I also realized that it's quite a niche actually, being able to photograph and write at the same time. Not many who can do that.
And you do that quite a bit, and you teach a great deal. And I want to remind people, I've mentioned your website many times, but not how to go to it. It's Tom Ang, A-N-G, tomang.com, and it's a great website. And there's a lot of good information there, and links to, well, and just the bibliography alone is worth reading.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for the plug.
Well,
appreciate it.
Well, of course, and we are talking about the new book, Photography: The Definitive Visual History by Tom Ang on award-winning publishers. DK has come out with the book. It's a new book available where I'm sure where all fine books are found, online and in your local bookstore if you're lucky to still have one. The way that we share information now, with everything being so in real time, this idea of Skyping and texting and all of that, does that minimize the need or importance for iconic photographs? Or our ability to appreciate them, maybe, is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the millions, the trillions, all right? 1.5 trillion of images. That's the estimate from the industry of how many pictures are produced each year, all right? 1.5 trillion. I'll let that sink in a bit. That, of course, makes it much more difficult to distinguish photographs. I gave a talk where I once likened photographs to fish sperm. Okay, what you do is you produce trillions of fish sperm in the hopes that one of them is going to find its way to an egg and actually eventually produce a fish. And that's what we do with pictures. We produce trillions of these things, and we hope that one of them is going to find its way into somebody's, some picture editor's box, and it gets published, or into a book, and it actually gets published and actually gets used. And so it's very difficult to distinguish one picture from another. I mean, I was, as you mentioned, I was a juror on major competitions, and the last one, Wildlife Photographer of the Year, we sat through, I think, 40,000 images. Right? We had to look through that kind of number, and I tell you, most of them were fantastic. They were superb, and it was very hard to find the ones that were superb. And the point that I make in the book at one point is where I say that we lose the particular as the numbers of pictures increases as well. So that sense of the kind of singular event, that's now very much lost, actually. And whether it's for the better or the worse, I'm not sure.
It does. Do young photographers start out thinking that they're going to create memorable art, or is it self-expression?
I think most of them want to make a living doing something which they think is fun and sexy and cool. And then they realize, actually, it takes a great deal of work to produce one image that actually makes money.
A lesson learned in most disciplines, I think, Tom. But how was it?
It's all hard work.
Yeah, exactly. How was it for you? What was the progression? What was the roadmap like for you? Did you, you talked about being able to be creative. I mean, it starts there, but then when does it turn into, I'm good enough to make a living at this, and how do you chase that?
How do you chase that? I tell you what. I think one secret of I've come up with is that that's one thing you never chase. Whether that being good enough to say I've got there, or to be professional, or to be paid for. I think the way I've always tried to work is actually really just to produce the best that I could, and then it's up to others. If they don't like it, well, they can disappear off the face of the earth. But if they do, then I expect to be paid for it.
But that requires a tremendous amount of luck, doesn't it?
I think it demands a tremendous amount of luck, but also basically just a heck of a lot of hard work. To really, really push and push and push, and that's something I try to tell young photographers.
Mm-hmm.
When I say try to teach them about picture editing, and I say, well, actually, if you hesitate, then if you have any doubt, then it's out. And they look at me open-mouthed, in horror, thinking,
right.
Oh heck, that means all my pictures are out. And of course, that's exactly what I mean. If they don't make that kind of grade within themselves, how are they possibly going to scramble up to be distinguished amongst the 1.5 trillion other pictures on the planet? That's a struggle. But on the other hand, I'll tell you a little story about an interview I had with Alfred Eichenstadt, great IZ who had more life covers than any other photographer, and who worked with life from the beginning almost to the end. And I asked him, how would it be if you started photography now? And he looked at me and he said, oh, no way.
Oh, really?
I'm so glad I started 50 years ago, because there's too much competition now.
Is that true? I know
that was 30 years ago.
That's happening now with music and a lot of other disciplines. Are independent bloggers and photographers? Is there a place for the work? I mean, it used to be, you wanted Life magazine, you wanted National Geographic. There were certain publications that you wanted to be in, and now there's such an open door. You mentioned the 1 point something trillion images.
Yeah.
Is it just I don't know, like the Wild West of photography now?
I don't know about the Wild West. I think we've got to face the fact that there are 7 billion people on the planet. I think, and that the media landscape is completely different from what it used to be. Mm-hmm. So that we don't have these great monolithic organizations like Time and Life and National Geographic is great, but it just deals with just a pinprick in terms of the photographic output that the world produces. That whole landscape has changed tremendously. In some ways, it's very exciting, but in other ways, it because of the variety and richness of work that is possible. Of course, the downside, as we touched earlier, is that it's very hard for these young ones, and actually old ones as well, to make a living and pay the gas bill. That's a tough conundrum, and we were I remember discussing this with agency chiefs 20 years ago when things started to go online.
One of the neat things about this particular book, Photography: The Definitive Visual History, is that you show and highlight and explain and talk about photography, great photography, in a variety of technological advances, almost as if they were different mediums. Are they different mediums? Is the technology doing more of the work that used to be done in darkrooms by photographers themselves?
That's whether they new media or not, I suppose, is a bit of a technical issue, which probably is not too useful to go into. But I think if we mean that a new technology generates new forms of art, new approaches, new thinking, and stimulates different kinds of creativity, then yes, absolutely. That's one of the really exciting things about digital photography, that it hugely expanded the gamut, the range of things that photographers could do to an image, and that was very exciting. I was right in at the beginning of that, and and my colleagues, while I was getting all excited about it, my colleagues were sounding like the photographers the artists of the 1850s, who were saying, "Wow, this is not good enough. This is going to destroy art." They even formed things like the Rail Photography Society, to campaign against the rise of digital.
Was there ever a feeling by you that, wow, I just figured out how I can, do this in the darkroom and make this incredible image, and now this technology comes out and anybody can do it?
I think I got excited by discovering that actually there were ways digitally to mimic what we could do in the darkroom. But I was always aware that it was never really ever quite as subtle or as and it's not just subtle. It's not just a question of quality, but it's a very important aspect, which is that it was actually very slightly unpredictable as well if you did it in the darkroom. Whereas on a computer, it's a little bit too predictable. Mm-hmm. So it depends a little bit too much on your own skills. And that element of chance and unpredictability is actually still one of the great charms of working with film, which we actually can't easily reproduce with digital.
Now, you've been involved in a lot of aspects of photography, as I mentioned in the intro, Tom. You've taught, you've done presentations, you've put together video specials, you've done editing, you've judged at international competitions. Of all of that,
I've been very lucky. I've had lots of gigs.
Of all of that, is there's something that you've particularly enjoyed that surprised you?
I think it surprises me that I can continue to work at this kind of level with the support that I get from my publisher. It's not, maybe not so much of a surprise, but it's a total delight that I can do it. I do realize that I'm incredibly privileged to be able to, in the first place, have had all these different gigs working in different parts of the industry, and then being able to share it as well. I've been so blessed and fortunate in that way. But I think for me the most rewarding thing, and actually really most important thing, is that I pass on as much as I can of what I've learned and understood about photography. And I know that it's not conventional, and any art historian reading the book may well be horrified by the way I've approached the history of photography, because I'm not a historian. I'm interested in people. I'm interested in real lives. Well,
keeping that spirit of sharing in mind, what what is the first thing you tell aspiring photographers?
I think what I will say when if I think they can take it, it is that if they want encouragement, then they better give up now.
Very good.
It's a tough one, and they're going to get a lot of rough deals, and they're going to have to ride all of them.
And that's really to test the passion, isn't it?
I think so. I think it's no different if you wanted to work in films, or if you wanted to work in a band. Nobody's going to encourage you. You're going to have to say, I want to do this, and nobody's going to stop me because I've got something to show. I've got something to say.
Well, and Tom, you certainly do have something to say, and a lot of it is being said in this new book from DK Publishers called Photography, The Definitive Visual History by Tom Ang. You can find out more about Tom at tomang.com. It's a great website, by the way, Tom.
Thank you very much.
And Tom, thanks so much for spending this time with us. Good luck with the book and with all that you do. You seem to be enjoying yourself.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that continues for a long time to come. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your interest in the work, too.
All right. Take care. That was Tom Ang.
Yeah,
We'll be back with more of the Tom Sumner Program coming up in just a moment or so.